Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Cardano After Town Hall session on governance. We're going to talk a little bit about the Cardano Improvement Proposal 1694, which is the design for community governance, and whether it actually is proposing a secret plutocracy, and what the challenges are of actually designing a truly decentralized governance system. Appreciate everyone being here. I'm going to take about 15 to 20 minutes to present sort of an overview of an essay I put together. And before I go any further, let me copy the link to the essay because some of you may not have seen it yet. Just a moment here. Let's see. Okay. So I put this together. I was a participant at the workshop that IOG hosted on CIP 1694, as was Mercy and Joanna, who are also here with us today. And was anyone else at the workshop? I don't see anyone. I think it was the three of us. It was an outstanding workshop. I learned a lot. It was fantastic meeting people. But as my essay explains, I have deep concerns about the foundations of this proposal and whether it actually achieves the goals of decentralized governance, or in fact will converge to a secret plutocracy. So I put a few slides together, kind of overviewing what I wrote in the essay, and I'm going to show those now and then open it up for discussion. And as I'm doing that, let's see. Just also say, I run a small business called Photrek. We work on decision-making algorithms. A lot of our experience comes from machine intelligence, but through Cardano, we've also now been applying these concepts to design of governance systems. So, and it's a privilege to be part of the community. So let me advance this slide. Okay, so I'm going to go over the CIP. I'm going to go over why I think one coin, one vote is actually a form of civil attack itself, and what some of the vulnerabilities are for the proof of stake, the existing proof of stake, and then talk a bit about quadratic voting. I'm not going to try to go into all the mechanics of quadratic voting. Myself and Snaprilla have done that in other meetings. And then I want to kind of go to, what should we do about this? What should our response be if we're concerned about these issues? So just a summary of what CIP 1694 is. It's a Cardano improvement proposal, and that process is pretty open and transparent. It does require some technical skills to participate in the GitHub repository editing process, but it is open to anyone who wants to dive in and write a proposal or edit a proposal or comment on a proposal. What's addressed in CIP 1694 is the last step of these proposals, where it gets approved to be a network change. Currently, that is done by a federation of Input Output Global, the Cardano Foundation, and Emergo. And this proposal would change that to a community governance that has three components. First, there's a constitutional committee that's going to act a little bit like a Supreme Court, in that their role is to make sure that a CIP doesn't violate a Cardano constitution. That constitution is not an existing document, but it is also in progress, and there will be workshops to develop that constitution. the primary decision body is the delegated reps, where anyone in the community can delegate their ADA to a representative, and then that representative uses that delegation of coins as their voting power for deciding what CIPs should be approved. Once the Constitutional Committee and the delegated reps have approved a CIP, then the stake operators are also part of the decision process. They're the ones that actually implement changes. Furthermore, with the delegated reps, they also serve a role of a kind of check and balance on the Constitutional Committee. So if both the stake pool operators and the delegated reps feel that the Constitutional Committee has overstepped the bounds of their mandate, they can be that group as a whole can be removed, and then a new set of new committee would be appointed. There is a clear decision at this point from the group that's actually working on this design that one coin, one vote is the only option for the first iteration of this governance system. I think that's a problem, and I'm going to discuss why. So first of all, the big reason I'm concerned about, there's sort of two things that drive my concerns. Back in 2021, when my team first started looking at the issues around how to do community governance and what the concerns would be within one coin, one vote, my principal concern was that all societies distribute wealth in some sort of power law. There really aren't exceptions to this, and there's kind of some basic principles as to why wealth ends up getting distributed in this way. And frankly, trying to reverse that hasn't worked well either, because you end up with kind of authoritarian systems that cut people off from their freedom. So that you have to accept as a foundation for any society. There is going to be some sort of power law in the way wealth is distributed. You don't want it to be extreme, but you can't get rid of that either. But the bigger issue I learned as I dug into this is actually worse, because it turns out we kind of want a fair system of how we distribute power in our community. And wealth and cost are very important to the security of these decentralized networks. The whole point of the way Bitcoin was designed is that it has to be expensive for some attacker to try to process corrupt transactions. And this is the same principles that go into proof of stake, that is the foundation of the Cardano network. So that principle does need to be understood and be respected. However, the problem ends up where it turns out when you build this as a voting system, your power doesn't grow linearly with the amount of ADA, it grows non-linearly. And specifically, it grows approximately by the square of the number of votes. And this sets up a lot of really perverse things that I don't think anyone really wants, but I don't think people have a good understanding of what the impact of this property is. And in particular, as I think about the governance issues, you have this very perverse outcome in which a wealthy person gaining one more ADA has a much higher increase in power than the power that would be lost by a poorer member of the community selling one ADA. And so you end up with an incentive system here that has a positive feedback loop, where if you just look at the governance issues, someone with a low amount of ADA is going to be incentivized to sell their ADA to someone who's wealthier, because the amount of power they lose is less than the amount of power that the wealthy person gains. That kind of positive, one of the things that interesting to me is that in technical communities, no one would design a machine this way. It is like freshman engineering that negative feedback is essential to the stability of any system. And yet somehow these same technologists are perfectly fine to design socioeconomic systems that encourage these kind of positive feedback loops and encourage instability in our ecosystems. And I don't think this is appropriate. I don't think Cardano should be doing this. And I think it's important that we push back on it. So there are alternatives. The difficulty is that the alternatives typically require some sort of security around identity, because as soon as you go to any kind of alternative, then you can do what's called a Sybil attack, where you basically split your wallets and you pretend to be many different identities. Now, I'm going to accept as a premise, the feedback I got from the workshop is that identity, while it's being worked on and is an important part of the Cardano mission to have some sort of peer-to-peer identity system that the user can still protect their privacy, they're saying that that's not going to be available this year as part of what can be rolled out as the minimum viable governance product. So I decided to take a look at, okay, if we assume that people can split their wallets, does that really mean that we can only use one coin, one vote? I don't think so. And in particular, I think, well, the argument may be a little bit weak here. It probably needs to be strengthened. And some of this I'm kind of outlining and as action items, improving the arguments or improving what we're going to do on this could be part of the outcome of what we can work on as a group. Am I getting a question? I heard something in the background.
Sorry, I sneezed. Let me turn that down.
Oh, no problem. I will pause in a moment. I don't want to dominate the discussion, but my point is that by one coin, one vote treats every single coin as an independent identity. And so in a sense, there's a Sybil attack built into one coin, one vote, because you're pretending that every coin is independent, when in fact you know that most of them are correlated by being controlled and owned by a particular person. And so I think this suggestion that Sybil attacks and a lack of an identity system makes it prohibitive to think about alternatives is actually a red herring. And let me go on here. I skipped a slide, and maybe I'll come back to it because I feel like I've gone on long. I think this problem is already affecting our SPO operation. That's another discussion, though. Let me just skip that for today. So let's consider quadratic voting without identity. Very briefly, what quadratic voting seeks to do is to compensate for this fact that you quadratically gain influence with each coin. So then it's saying it's important to set a fair price on that influence, and that fair price needs to be based on the square of how many votes you're going to purchase, in a sense. I think it's related to the escalating cost of extracting a scarce resource. So we think if you think about oil or gold or diamonds, these scarce resources, as you try to extract more of it, the cost of that extraction go up. And then on the opposite side of it, anytime you're in the grocery store, you always get sort of buy two, get one free, right? Because there's marginal, the marginal price or the marginal value of something doesn't stay a constant. And so we shouldn't think that every single vote has to be the exact same price. So now if let's just I'm just, and again, this argument needs to be strengthened, but just as a sort of envelope calculation to first think about the problem. Let's consider someone who has 1,800,000,000 that they can vote with. And let's also assume that there's some way not to identify them, but to just slow down the process of automating votes. So they may have some people have pushed back on me on this, but I don't see why the voting app can't have a capture thing that just provides a little bit of proof that you're a human. We use them all the time. Every website I go on that they want some sort of verification, there's a capture app. Why can't that be part of the voting app? So anyways, assuming you can't split every single coin into a separate wallet, but let's say you can create 1,000 wallets. Well, the way that turns out, that person would end up with 1,000,000 votes. So I don't show the calculation here, but essentially you'd have 1,000 coins in each wallet. The square root of that, or rather, you'd have 1,000,000 in each wallet. The square root of that is 1,000 times 1,000 is 1,000,000. So even there, you get 3 orders of improvement in terms of the way the on the influence. So furthermore, there's some fairly well-known, they've already been documented in the literature, they've already been developed by groups like Bitcoin, where you can actually build in correlation measurements between the wallets, so that this quadratic weighting is not just based on an individual wallet, but it's also based on correlations between wallets. So even if someone has 1,000 wallets, if they vote this exact same way in each wallet over time, you'd have to do this over time, then those wallets would have a correlation index that's very high. And they would get that as a group, they would get this quadratic weighting. So I'm interested in feedback on this, what other people's thoughts are. And I do see from conversations that there are competing views on this. So I think it's good to listen and understand different perspectives. But my big concern is that the dynamics of this process are such that you don't end up at the end with a decentralized system. You end up with a competition for institutions to try to correlate votes. And once they have a threshold point, they essentially have a dictator role in any future development of the Cardano network. And my question is, should we be working on comments or edits on this CIP-1694? Should we be working on another CIP to initiate this? What are some step forwards? And I will close the slides with that and open it up for discussion.
Okay. I took a few notes, and there's some things that I wanted to address. First of all, for quadratic voting, yes, it incentivizes wallet splitting, which also incentivizes on-chain transactions, which grows our treasury. So that's certainly something that we can look at as say there's a disincentive, but also an incentive to the good actors in Cardano built into the network if you have this vote splitting issue. When it comes to, as you said, these bad actors are going to split their wallets to try and unduly influence the vote. Should there be another CIP? Should we keep working on 1694? I think you were at the summit, and if people from the summit are saying that we should start looking at an alternative, looking at alternatives to kind of coalesce around and contribute on and collaborate on is certainly something that we should consider. In the voting app you mentioned, maybe there should be some biometric or some capture system. Unfortunately, us trying to fight AI is like a really bad idea, right? It's an uphill battle. And the idea is that these things will be able to be done on chain anyway. So a determined bad actor would just be able to sign the transaction themselves instead of being able to, need to go through an actual app, because the app's just going to be a front end to the on-chain transaction. And then, you come all the way down to quadratic voting, which I've been against for the longest time because of the implementation of DIDs to make it successful. There's a way to implement it. There's a way to use quadratic voting, but you also have to put in the right checks and balance against that hyper incentivization to split these wallets. And through a cascading DREP system, you can fix that, because it ultimately means as people pool their votes and resources together, the outsized impact of that doesn't have a negative effect on chain. There's one last thing you have to add, and as you guys might know, might not know, I've been working on for the last month and a half. I was the first one who raised the kind of CIP-1694 is dreadful, we need to do something about it kind of issue before it was vogue to do so. I've been working with my team on a framework for the community to start building and sharing ideas, which launches at the end of this month as a CIP for us to consider, where we acknowledge that there are going to be large wallets that have that outsized vote, and we implement a mechanism where the very largest wallets that have that outside vote, instead of losing power or losing all of their influence, we give them a different form of power. And this very much comes into a reform of the Constitutional Committee and its structure to be a more egalitarian rather than a closed door, sovereignly appointed group. So those are the ideas I had based just on the presentation you've just given. And I'm just going to say that's some really good research that you've done there, and really, really well put together and presented.
Thank you, Tom. I appreciate your input. I'll look forward to learning and understanding more about the SIP that you're working on. And yeah, and I think you bring up another interesting point too, because one of my perspectives is the following: is that the quadratic voting control, I think, only needs to be on the DREPs. I don't think it has to be on every voter in the system. So once the DREP gets delegated, now then they already you have maybe two very different kinds of DREPs. One kind of DREP is someone has their own wealth, and they're just going to act as a DREP with their own coins, and they don't have any intention of trying to recruit delegators. That type of person may very well want anonymity and not care about identifying themselves. On the other hand, you're going to have DREPs who are actively seeking to recruit delegates. And even if they use a pseudo identity, they have to manage some identity in order to communicate to the community how they're going to represent the community.
Right.
And so there has to be some kind of identity there. And even if you get an ambitious DREP who wants to manage 10, 100, maybe even 1,000 identities, okay, but that's a lot of work too. Just being one DREP is going to be hard. Okay, trying to be 1,000 DREPs, that's an enterprise level project. Now, I'm not saying that no one would do it, but what I'm saying is, for a minimum viable product, that shouldn't prohibit us from implementing quadratic voting or something like it that puts some controls on centralizing to a plutocracy.
Yeah, I think you touched on a really important point there, and that we are creating a minimum viable product, minimum viable governance model, and it's actually a very common misconception amongst those who've been so deeply enthralled with CIP-1694, that there are a lot of issues that have been resolved which aren't really resolved, because if you go to the very beginning of the CIP, there are lots of things that are listed as outside of the scope of this CIP, and one of the big things listed outside the scope were the impact of large holders, large wallets, and the impact of institutional wallets and holders.
Right.
That's the big concern that really has to be included and addressed in a
Right.
minimum viable governance model. If we leave ourselves open to attack vectors from the start, and we're not saying that Binance would do anything wrong or Coinbase would do anything wrong or anything like that, but what we're saying is that it can't be considered viable if it has those glaring weaknesses. And I think there's a chap who works. I think he's a stake operator, multiple stake operator. Rick McCracken, you're probably
Hmm.
familiar with him.
Yeah, I
Um,
know Rick well.
put down a big list of potential attack vectors and things that need to be considered
Right.
for the coming CIP or for 1694 if that monstrosity ends up going through. Um, so there are many factors that have to be considered. On your point of the concern of, well, if one person has a huge wallet or one company has a huge wallet, they split it into multiple wallets and they get run multiple identities to be multiple DREPs. Sure, that's a problem, right? It's fair to say that that's fairly unlikely to be one of the largest risk factors, considering all of the other outlying problem areas that need to be addressed first.
Yeah.
But I think it's best to look at the DREPs from a. I think we need to
Plus, let me,
really sit
Tom,
back
I'd like your input.
just to finish my point.
Okay.
I think we need to seriously step back and reassess how we're doing DREPs in the first place, just for the sole reason of going, how can we make sure that DREP being a DREP is accessible to everyone, and that if there's no incentive for someone to be a DREP in terms of if they become a DREP, their own votes diminished, or if they become a DREP, there's a cost associated with them, all that kind of stuff. Um, we need to make sure that it's structured in a way that it's organic to how people get onboarded into the ecosystem in the first place. I'll touch on that point a little bit later.
Thank you, Tom. Those are great comments, and I'll respond to them in a moment, but I'm going to let Mercy and then Nin go first.
Um, thanks a lot, Tom. I think I want to hear a bit more about your example regarding giving big wallets a different kind of power, maybe with examples. That could be interesting. Another thing, maybe clarification from you, Kenrick, in terms of assigning the quadratic voting at the DREP level. So I'm thinking, so for instance, there are two case studies, two examples. So there is one that is, say, one person with, say, what, 1 billion ADA, and then they decide that they want to sort of be a DREP all by themselves. I would agree why assigning quadratic voting to that one wallet would be fair. But on the other hand, let's say I decide to be a DREP, and for some reason I'm able to acquire 1 billion individual people, like let's say one person has one ADA, but I'm able to get 1 billion people to delegate to me, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it is fair to assign both quadratic because we have a lot more humans delegated to me, for instance,
Yeah.
than one single person with 1 billion ADA. So I don't know if
Yeah,
you've
that's a
put
good
any
point.
thought. Yeah. And then thirdly, what I so, we've had this aside conversation with Kenrick and so on regarding, and that's why I want to know more about, Tom, your ideas about a different kind of power, because I feel like we still don't have all the information on the table. For instance, Joanna will bear me out in terms of, when we're in Colorado, our big issue, and, Kenrick was also very supportive of that as well. Obviously, that's why he talks about quadratic voting. But for the places that we come from, we don't have big, big whales there, right? Sometimes you would even be lucky to get a delegation. to a stake poll. And if we go by stake poll delegation, then we don't even know how DREPs will get delegation. Hopefully things are different. Anyway, what I'm alluding to is the fact that we brought this out, right? We brought this up as an issue. People were very attentive, including Charles. And what he suggested was a situation whereby either the Constitutional Committee or the MBOs could be structured in such a way that people that don't have that willpower, but are making significant contributions to the ecosystem, could have an influence in how the votes should be. Thanks to Kenrick, I know that, sort of we're going forward. Thanks for your contribution. But I also feel like until we know how that could potentially look like, I don't feel like it's a fair, position to keep saying that, we need to go by quadratic voting. So that's what, I want to contribute. Thanks.
Well, and let me just respond quickly to that, because you do bring up a good point that, the delegation process he has even less ability to have controls on identity. But your example is correct in that you would ultimately like to have it at the delegation process where the weighting gets implemented quadratically for just the reason you described, that if a DREP is successful in having broad representation, you'd like to weight the fact that they have broad rather than narrow representation. So I do agree with your point. And so the challenges become identity. And maybe Nin, you want to go next. And Nin, just so people know, is leader of Snapbrilla, and they've actually implemented quadratic voting and funding on the Cardano network. As I understand it, their next steps are twofold: one, to implement an identity system themselves, and two, to get support from either the community or another source of funding to actually fund projects that will use this capability.
Hey, Kenrick. I think Cardano is very lucky to have you in the community because you're pushing for this. I think in Fund 9, we saw the results of one coin, one vote. And even in Fund 8, very clearly, where people with big bags were able to really decisively decide who gets funded, who doesn't. If CIP-1694, like if we imagine Cardano being a huge community of decentralized mini organization individuals, right, who decide on the future of the protocol, like what SIPs go in or what decisions to make, election results, and so on, even which committees go up, who gets it to be a DREP. It's going to be pretty much like the title of this breakout room suggests. Is it a secret plutocracy? I don't think it's a secret plutocracy. I think it's a very obvious plutocracy where, rich become richer, and those in power are able to retain power. Now, it is not a bad thing. We need to engage and work with people who have been early adopters, who are willing to put a lot of big bags in Cardano. That's kind of how liquidity comes in. However, I do believe that we should balance this somehow. We can't just give people the whales, the keys to every decision on chain, and that's where quadratic voting comes in. Snapbrilla, we have implemented the quadratic voting API. We even built a Discord bot to give as an example. That Discord bot does not have you can use it in this way where you can connect your wallet and we'll take a snapshot of your voting power in Cardano, in ADA, or any Cardano native tokens. So it could be based on Gimbal tokens or whatever tokens that you decide on. Or the other way could be you don't have to connect the wallet, and we just give everybody who participates in a vote.
If we could end the
maybe
advertisement and get back to the discussion, that'd be great.
That's what I'm doing, Tom.
He is
Thank you.
this is very relevant, Tom.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Everybody would be able to get 100 tokens and then use those tokens to quadratically select which things they want to vote for, express their intent, whether yes or no, and also their intensity of that intent, how much of those votes they want to spend.
Right.
Now, part of it is using identity. You can connect, some identity, some DID solution, which would be linked to like a KYC to verified credential. Hopefully, one day we'll have ZK proofs on that, so people don't have to dox themselves. They just show that they've been verified. Or you can run it without identity, because Gitcoin has doing quadratic voting for a long time before they started doing Gitcoin Passport. Just recently, and they have defense mechanisms against Sybil attacks. One of which is just taking squaring the sum of square roots. Another one that's been recently published is Governor C as Governor Charlie. There's a coincidence because Charles is the founder of Cardano, but they essentially use verified random functions to when somebody connects a wallet to assign a random value to the wallet to make sure that it is unique. It's not is not split from other wallets, and it's fully decentralized. VRF is something that's used by Ouroboros for stake pool as well today. It's not perfect, but what it creates is probabilistic quadratic voting. I can put the research in the chat.
Put a link in, because that sounds very important.
Yeah.
This was the whole, part of where this came from is a discussion with the CIP writers. And their pushback is that we're not going to do KYC as part of this design. And that's another discussion, whether that's a good choice or not, but I think that's the choice they've made, and I'm going to respect it. And then my task that I made to myself was, okay, I'm going to think about quadratic voting without identity. How, and my first question, is it really worse than one coin, one vote? And I'm not convinced of that. And then, as Nin is pointing out, there's actually solutions to build in some control mechanisms on the splitting of wallets that don't involve identity. And let me I'll come to you, Andre and Tom, in just a moment, but since Nin provided a lead into this, I also want to sort of discuss two different kinds of quadratic voting. One was the one I was originally starting with, is you just weight the whole wallet. So, here you take a square root. You could take an nth root. You could think about what power you want to decimate the wallets by. However, the actual full approach to quadratic voting has some other properties to it that are really elegant and actually require, in a sense, an investment in your choice. So the way quadratic voting was originally proposed is that you're actually making a choice to purchase votes. And then, of course, the price is quadratic. Once you're paying that price into the community. So it would, in a sense, go like Nin's described, it would go into a smart contract. Now, here's one of the elegant properties of it, that at the end of the voting, when everything's done, everyone who participated gets an equal distribution out of that smart contract. Now, what does that do? for the wealthy holder or the someone who's very passionate about the issue, they do get to use their passion and their wealth to make an investment in the outcome. But at the same time, they pay a pretty high price and an escalating price on that influence. At the same time, someone who's not as wealthy or maybe doesn't have as strong a passion about that particular project, if they participate and they express an opinion, that's information that's useful to the community, and they get a payment out through this distribution at the end as an incentive for participation. And incentive for participation, I see Tom shaking his head, but
This is a terrible idea.
Incentive for participation will be part of CIP-1694. It's part of what we do in the Catalyst program right now. People get
right,
a
and
reward.
that's why it doesn't. That's why it doesn't work. And like Kenrick, respectably, right, respectfully, you're clearly a fairly intelligent guy, right? And you're clearly very astute when it comes to matters of governance, right? You clearly thought about this for a long time, and I respect the effort that you've put in. Unfortunately, and it seems all too common in Project Catalyst and Cardano in particular, is that we seem to attach ourselves to certain ideals. And I used to work in academia, by the way. I used to work at the University of Cambridge. And my tutor, Dr. Sholem Ball, one of the best biochemists in the country, perhaps in the world, used to tell me the problem with science these days is that people will decide what they want to believe and then search for all of the facts to make them right. And that's, I think, a failing that we've seen both in industry and in academia at large. So what we really need to do is step back and look at what we've got, what's working, these incentivization models, these ideas that we'd like to put forwards, and then ask the question, okay, does that stand up to real world testing? Because I put to you now, and I respectfully put to you now, that building in a flawed system, building in basically a incentivization structure into the system that encourages people to abuse the system, but then rewards people for participation.
Pejorative terms. I'm not sure where those are coming from. And
okay. Clearly, you're not intelligent enough to understand. So let me simplify it a little bit more.
Tom,
right?
Tom, hold on a second, because
no, it's not pejorative. It's you just deny the premise outright. You just can't comprehend the premise outright.
What I would ask is read the literature on this, because it has actually been experimented with, it has been tested, and has been used.
Okay. Which
and
literature?
I'm not saying that I'm not saying, it is important to criticize ideas.
None? Okay.
And it is important, as you're saying, to find out what's wrong with proposals. So I'm on board.
But you're not addressing the argument. You're just saying, well, read a book. Okay, well, what's your opinion? I'm asking for what's your solution, because at the moment what you've suggested, respectfully to Kenrick, what you've suggested is let's build in a DREP system, let's put a smart contract in the system so that when people split those wallets, the revenue generated from that wallet splitting then goes back to people for voting, right? When you pay people to vote, things go wrong. You should not have an incentivized voting system in the first place, because that's a financial incentive for people to game the system through voting. And as we've seen in Catalyst, it's a financial incentive for people not to vote because of what they're voting on, but to vote for the financial reward.
Okay, so I respect it, but I'm going to move on to Andre, because we did skip him, and I think that's a side conversation. I'm happy to have it with you, but let's take that as a side conversation. Andre, go ahead.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for interesting conversation. I wasn't paying much attention to this CIP recently, and what you say that it's plutocracy. I think another word would be better is oligarchy, because both maybe Cardano there are several big entities like IOHK, Emurgo, Cardano Foundation, and in Catalyst also some companies which they are similar to oligarchic groups like in real life, and they win the vast majority of proposals, like Swarm and development companies. And I don't say that it's like bad, but it's just like it is. But there is still a room for, I don't know, anyone new, not aligned with any of the oligarchy groups to come work and maybe submit proposal, win, or earn something. About voting, I think what it seems from me, but it's only now impression. I didn't analyze it completely. That quadratic voting, which you suggest, it might be better. But even if there will be, as they suggest, one ADA, one vote, it will be the same oligarchy system which is now, and it's working, and it's already working like 10 funds. I've been since fund 1, so I see, and there are a lot of things I could criticize in Catalyst, and I did it sometime, but it's another big topic. But the main thing is that it's working. There are proposals, there are funding, and the process is going on. Now it's probably paused, not only because of these changes, but also because of market situation, because the treasury is not limitless. Also, I think the interesting point would be see who will be these DREPs, how it will be possible to apply, because I remember I signed up something months ago, and now I'm just not following other dates when to apply, or this is something for the future. So, yeah, so these are just my small opinion, and but I'll join next calls as soon if I can.
Okay,
Thanks.
great. And thank you, Andre. And so let me address a couple of things you said. One, just a clarification. There's actually now 2 DREP programs. The one where there were some workshops held last year is for the Catalyst program. And the Catalyst program will be implementing DREPs. They've actually got a little bit different format in terms of how they're going to run that. But that then is distinct from the DREPs who will be for the Cardano governance, where the Cardano governance is about the CIP process and the management of the network itself, rather than management of the Catalyst treasury. So just to clarify that point. And then you do bring up an interesting point. Okay, so Andre's point, and maybe we can play off of this with what Naim was saying, is that Catalyst has run now for about a 2-year period between funds 1 and 9, and it has worked. You know, it has funded fascinating 1,000 different projects. A lot of good things have come out of it, but we've also observed the difficulties too. And I'll just point out a couple of difficulties as we go forward. Number one, part of why Catalyst has worked is that IOG explicitly stayed out of it in terms of voting. They have a large wallet, but they, as far as I understand, they made a corporate decision not that they're managing the Catalyst program, and therefore they're not going to vote it. That would have changed things a lot in terms of that's one. And I think, as I understand it, the Cardano Foundation also put some restrictions. They have voted, but they've kind of put some guidelines and restrictions around how they vote.
Vote in challenge settings.
There you go. Thank you, Lloyd, for clarifying that. Right. They don't vote on projects. Binance and Coinbase so far have done the same thing. As far as I understand, they have large wallets, but they've made decisions as a corporation not to influence these things. I'm not convinced you can count on those same kind of restrictions from these institutions when it comes to the network. I think when it comes to, when brass tacks, right? If there's something that they see in the network that they either do or do not want, I think they will use that voting power. So I appreciate what you're saying, Andre. It's not that the starting gate isn't my concern, actually. I think the first few rounds of it might actually work, might be okay. But what is missing from the discussion is this very strong potential for convergence to one institution controlling the network. That's what you're going to get that's what I'm claiming. More research would have to be done, but I'm saying that the threat here is that one coin, one vote doesn't initiate decentralization. it initiates a competition for one institution to control the network. I want to take, so I see Tom and Nin still have their hands up, but they've actually contributed a bit now to the conversation. So I want to see if anyone else who doesn't have their hand up would actually like to be brave and dive in. Joanna,
like
go
to-
ahead. You raised your hand. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly how to go about this, so I'm just kind of gonna try to speak what's on my mind. Maybe we can tackle this from a different perspective, because I think we also tend to forget that there's two steps to this. There's the regular ADA voter that gives their vote to the DREP. So what can we do in terms of maybe setting like voting thresholds, for example, or deposits or something to, and I don't know how this is going to work really, but like I think one ADA, one vote could work for the concept of when I'm giving my vote to a DREP. But maybe if we add like a threshold of like how much of like what the maximum weight of vote could actually hold as a DREP, that could also kind of balance things out. So then if you reach to the point of like, and this is a small number, but 1 million ADA per DREP, then your vote will count as something. And
Yeah.
I know these numbers
So-
are hard to come up with, but
Yeah, this is a great point, Joanna. And this is an interesting thing, I think, to just talk more carefully with the designers about, because
yes.
what you're suggesting is explicitly part of the Catalyst DREP program. They, just as there's a saturation on the pools,
Yeah.
there is planned to be a saturation on the Catalyst DREPs.
Yeah.
However, in talking with the designers for the Cardano CIP-1694, they have explicitly not set a cap on the
That's not-
DREPs.
I think there was discussion around what those voting thresholds would be, and I'll get back to that. But Tom, I don't know if you had something.
The
to say about it.
thresholds were different.
Yeah.
The thresholds were different
Great
than
moderation.
a cap. And the designers, I had very detailed conversation with the designers, and they specifically rejected putting a cap on the DREP power, claiming again that since we don't have identity on the DREPs, then they can just split their wallet, so there's no point of having a cap. That was, that I don't agree with it. It's not how the Catalyst program is planning their DREP program. So I don't understand the disconnect there of why there isn't even an attempt to address this issue about extreme disparities in the way the voting power is distributed. And I see Lloyd's hand up, and he was also at the CIP workshop. So dive in, Lloyd.
It's just, and I'll just briefly add that the reasoning behind it is they're taking it at the face value of what it is today.
Yes.
The reality of the network that we live in is that there is no way to differentiate between the different voters. So anything that we do to put a cap on this, it's simply going to create, you'll actually create the problem where, okay, great, if it's 1 million, then I'm going to create 20 DREPs with 1 million ADA per DREP, and now I've got 20 votes that nobody else has. So I'm still have the exact same level of power that I had before, but now it's hidden, it's obfuscated. And that's, so what this is doing, this is actually allowing us to see the network power structure in the setting that it's in, and be able to evaluate it and socially work with it in order to try to move things in the right direction. Because that's actually where, and this is also where the Constitutional Committee comes in. The Constitutional Committee is there as the backstop. That's why they wanted to explicitly have really no authority other than if it violates the Constitution, it doesn't pass, and that's it. It's a simple check of yes, no. Does it pass the does it pass muster with the Constitution or not? And that's where that backstop is there to try and stop problems from people coming in early and getting participation early and flooding that network with proposals to take ADA and do whatever they're going to do because they've got the voting power to do it.
Thank you, Lloyd.
Sure.
I'll come to you in a minute, Tom, but I again want to ask, is there anyone else in the group that would like to speak up? And we'll probably go to approximately the half hour and then close the meeting. So last chance for someone who's quieter. to take some initiative and express their thoughts. Go ahead, Steve.
You know, I'm in Cardano for the long haul, right?
Mm-hmm.
And when I look at the long haul and the real goals of this ecosystem, it's not to serve in the long term. It's not to serve the people who hold the ADA right now, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right? They don't call it proof of stake for nothing. We didn't have the Ouroboros protocol developed on a whim or to create plutocracy. You know, it's pretty scientifically thought about and it works. And so you've got a few thousand people that are working on this system to represent this technology to people, billions of people around the world. And they came into the system based on a proof of stake model. That is the stake that they earn, that they build, that they buy, you know, with their hard-earned money, you know, to be a part of building out that larger system. And so for me, what was important with 1694 or any alternative governance proposal is not who gets served right now, but how is it going to make available those hundreds of millions to billions of people in the world to have a voice in the technology that we want them to build upon.
That's a fantastic
level,
perspective, Steve. Yeah.
You know, and on that level, this worry and hand wringing, I don't have a lot of I don't have a lot of concern about. I do have a concern about exchanges because right now they are the whales. I mean, based on a tweet that Tom put out a couple of weeks ago, not even input output has 1 billion ADA anymore, right? They have quite a bit left. And I'm betting that's probably true with Emergo, right? So I don't, you know, and the reason that I point out the exchanges, their interests are not ours. They are not the protocols. They are not the ecosystem's interests. And so, yeah, they should be fucking locked out, you know?
There's
in what we're doing right now, I believe that what we're looking for is the one thing that I like the thing that I like the most about 1694. It looks really easy to get over a state of no confidence, and that's so valuable. That is so valuable.
That was with great intention, and everybody, the people in the room in Longmont, what was great to see was that that they were all about low levels of no confidence on, you know, like that was great, and that was one of the more important things. And I just, if I can react very quickly to what you were saying, Steve, the idea of having a way to control, if you will, the stake at the exchanges is important. And I'm preparing right now a problem statement around that and a CIP that will follow the problem statement. And my CIP is that we in effect create unions that encourage the exchanges to delegate to people who are building on the network. So in other words, we build DAOs and we go after delegation from those places by providing real work, showing that real work, and say, hey, give us the power to vote with your ADA that you have staked in the exchanges. That's what I would like to see, and it's a social way of going about it. But I feel that the social way of going about it, the exchanges know that they do have customers who are looking at them and who are thinking about what they're doing. Their customers aren't dumb. And I think that it's important that we try and encourage their customers to go after them, to have them delegate the stake to the places that are doing the work. And I think that's a way we can do it.
Thank you, Lloyd. I'm going to let Tom and Nin go next, but if you could each kind of keep it short, and then if there's still time, Peter, I'll get to you. Thanks for raising your hand.
Sure thing. Nin, why don't you go first?
Sure. Sorry, my phone died. I didn't realize I had 5% or something like that. You know, with one coin, one vote, the issue is factional control problems, right? Where people create factions and the ultra powerful and ultra rich kind of just and it could be a DEX, could be a VC if Cardano and Morga has less than billion ADA. There are VCs that have more than $1 billion, many billions of dollars, right? So full protocol takeover is, you know, it although costly, right? You know, it's something that's a viable attack vector for sure.
Yeah, for
So-
sure. I mean, I'll just amplify that. Corporate takeovers are part of corporate history. That's the
Exactly.
dynamics that's being set up. We're building a system that's designed for corporate takeover. That's what I'm
Yeah,
concerned about.
Amazon launches a new product in 6 months and they already have $1 billion in revenue each year alone, right? So we can't be naive. And like I personally believe that identity in a way that's inclusive that empowers many is the way forward. It's not the end all be all. Quadratic voting is also not the end all be all, but it should be considered as a solution, right? We shouldn't be like okay with well we just okay with one coin one vote because it just works and it works so far, but apparently that's not the optimum, right? We shouldn't be comfortable with local optimums, and we should be moving forward to reach optimums that benefit everybody, whether they're poor or rich, whether they've been around longer or not, because, you know, if we're building like an operating system, financial operating system to give people freedom, to empower people to control their money, identity, wallets, careers, future, whatever, right? I'd say that people should have a voice in that, not only the ultra rich and the ultra powerful.
You know, I think I'd like to kind of close. I'll come to you in a moment, Tom. And maybe we can set up another town hall, Tom, to talk about your own SIP and
Next week, sure. I'll go through what is it, Catalyst Swarm, fill out a form or something.
Yeah, if you could do that, because I think you have a lot of good ideas, but I think it requires a fuller discussion. So
I appreciate
you're
that.
open to leading one. Next
Sure.
week, Photrek is doing one on our machine intelligence work. So
I don't want
to.
to clash with that. I'd love
But-
for you to be there.
but
Should we
it-
do the week after?
Sure. Yeah, maybe in 2 weeks. That'd be great.
Okay.
Why don't you make your comment, Tom, but keep it short. And then I think I like the way Steve and Nin have kind of wrapped this up, and I'm going to kind of come back and summarize what they said. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'll keep it short. And for the not just for the people here, but for the people watching as well, I think it's very important to bear in mind that it's very easy to get pigeonholed into one certain solution. A lot of people here are very supportive of the idea of a constitutional committee because they believe that's where they'll be. It's very important to remember that as we build out a system of governance, this is not a system of governance for the closed click group that happen to have the ear of IO or have the ear of the powers that be, the ones that get invited to the invitation only meetings and to sign the NDAs and not say a peep and all that kind of stuff. This is for the people, it's for everyone out there. And any system that disenfranchises a single Cardano user is not a system suitable for governance of our chain. So I'll leave it at that for now.
Thank you, Tom. And in fact, with a group from the committee, one of the next things I'm going to work on is another essay about consent-based decision-making and how we make sure that each individual has an opportunity to express concerns and those concerns get heard. It's hard. It's another hard problem, but it's critical to success. This was a fantastic discussion. I think there's more, and I feel like I'm going to close it here, but in a way, I didn't get to sort of what our action items should be. So maybe we will have some more of these meetings and kind of make some decisions as a group given our concerns, what actions should we take? But let me kind of close it with what Steve and Nin said, because I think they really captured an important part of this, is that the work we're doing on Voltaire governance is not for the current holders of ADA. It is for building a financial operating system that can work for decades, hundreds of years, to provide a better, free, open financial operating system that the global community can participate in. I think that's a great perspective, and why these problems are important, and why we need to be careful about how we approach the designs. Thank you, everyone. Really appreciate your input, and I'm going to stop the recording, and then we can chat a few more minutes before I actually close the meeting.